May, can, and will. Each of these words can be used in analogous situations, but they have distinct differences, and it is important to understand what these differences are. May suggests potential ability. It is not a certainty, but it is a possibility. Example, we may have arrived in different ships, but we are in the same boat now. In this context, when Martin Luther King is speaking to a broad audience, some people may have arrived figuratively in the same boat and some may have not. So he's denoting the fact that not everybody will necessarily share that, even if some of them might. Likewise, any of the suspects may have committed the crime. In this context, before the detective has ascertained what all the evidence is, they must entertain the fact that any of the suspects may have committed the crime, meaning that it is possible that they have committed the crime, but it is not a certainty. Now, when do we use may? It's ideal when outlining a hypothesis or describing potential findings or conclusions. It is also ideal when describing outcomes that can vary. Example, evidence suggests that disco dancing may improve cardiovascular health. In this context, we'll say may because perhaps there's only been one study and further research has to be done to account for external variables that the initial study may not have considered. Again, example, when hunting sharks, you may need a bigger boat. Depending on the size of the boat, the one that you have may or may not be sufficient. The word can is distinct from may because it indicates ability, an actual ability and not a potential ability. However, it is not a certainty that a specific outcome will occur. Example, Scooby-Doo can eat over 100 Scooby snacks. It doesn't mean that he's going to eat 100 Scooby snacks. It simply means that he has the ability to eat them. Likewise, we might say that Shaft can solve almost any crime. It doesn't mean that he will solve almost any crime. He may not take a case depending on the merits of the situation and whether or not he cares for the client, but he has the ability to solve almost any crime. When to use it? We're going to use can when we're focused on demonstrable ability, but also when other factors could lead to different outcomes. So even though we know that something has the ability to achieve a specific outcome, we don't know that other variables might not impede that outcome. Example, cognitive behavioral therapy can help people cope with trauma or anxiety or depression. However, there might be external factors that impede the ability of CBT in some contexts. Student-centered approaches can enhance learning outcomes. When teachers use student-centered approaches, it can enhance learning outcomes. However, if there are external factors, for example, a student might be coming from a neglectful home, those can impede the success of the student irrespective of the student-centered approaches. Will is used to indicate an absolute certainty that something will take place, something is going to happen. Example, I will always love you, says Dolly Parton. She is certain that her love will always exist in perpetuity for her beloved. Another example, Foxy Brown will find justice. She is certain that she is going to do that. Now, when do we use this in academic contexts? When outcomes are certain either due to action or inaction. Example, failure to cut CO2 emissions will lead to disaster, environmental disaster. In this case, we know demonstrably from past evidence that if CO2 emissions continue at the current rate, there will be an environmental disaster. Banning cigarette ads will lead to reduced tobacco use. Now, some might argue that this is not a certainty, but if a researcher has substantial evidence to support this claim, then they might make a more assertive and bold assertion that a certain outcome will be tied to a given variable or factor. So, quick summary. May is used when speaking of possibilities and potentialities. Can focuses on ability, but ability that might not lead to specific outcomes when it interacts with external factors. And will is used when speaking of a certitude, something that will absolutely happen. And it's usually a result of inaction rather than action because the inaction of the past has already demonstrated a given problem. That is all we have for this. Hopefully that was clear. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the comments section below, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.